quarters tonight. So thank you for attending. I hope you'll leave with a little more knowledge regarding Judge Handley and his will and the history and operation of the Handley Board of Trustees. One housekeeping matter before we get started, and that is, excuse me, we've got a lot of material to cover tonight. I usually find it's beneficial to have you note your questions, hold your questions. We will have a question and answer period that'll go on as long as you want to ask questions. I don't guarantee I've got all the answers, but I'm sure among everybody on the screen and here in the room, we ought to at least be able to bluff our way through it anyway. So, but I prefer to present the material and then have questions, okay? If that's okay with everyone, that's where I'd like to proceed. So, although I recognize some of you were here for Kim's presentation discussing Judge Quarles' book, John Handley and the Handley Bequests, a couple of 3 weeks ago, I think it's important for everyone to have some historical perspective regarding Judge Handley before we move on to the topics of his will and the formation and operation of the Handley Board of Trustees. He was born January 27th, 1835 in County Wexford, Ireland, the son of John Handley and Elizabeth Murphy. The judge changed the spelling to Handley after moving to the United States. His dad earned his living as a carpenter, but he also ran a pub in their personal residence. Following the potato famine, John Handley emigrated to Canada at age 19, seeking a better life. And eventually, some 2 years later, he received his naturalized citizen certificate in Monroe County, New York. While living in the area we today call Rochester, he supported himself using his carpentry skills he learned from his father, but he was privately studying, preparing himself to become a lawyer. Eventually, he moved to Washington to work for the government, married a woman of some means, was admitted to practice law in the District of Columbia, and after a few years, moved with his wife and her preteen son to Scranton, Pennsylvania, a busy period for sure. Although by all accounts, Judge Handley is said to have sympathized with the South in the Civil War, living in Pennsylvania, he enlisted and served a typical 3-month stint as a Union soldier in the Pennsylvania militia. At the end of his brief military career, Judge Handley returned to the practice of law while at the same time making shrewd investments in real estate and banking. In 1874, John Handley was elected to fill the additional judgeship created in Lucerne County and served as the foremost jurist in that region for 10 years. However, because the split vote within his party, he failed to win re-election. In Pennsylvania, as in some other jurisdictions, judges are elected, whereas in Virginia, they're appointed by the Virginia legislature. During the ensuing years, through hard work, thriftiness, and fortuitous circumstances, the young man who arrived in America penniless was now a rich man. Having spent a fair amount of time in Winchester, especially during the latter part of his life, he established some good friendships along the way and acquired interest in real estate here as well. Therefore, to those friends in Winchester who truly knew him, his will, which was executed December 29, 1890, was not as much of a surprise as it was to the residents of Scranton, Pennsylvania, the city where he made his home and amassed his fortune over 35 years of his life. Let's now look at his will itself. The first item started out fairly typically by directing all of his just debts be paid, his funeral be conducted in the most plain manner, and that my remains be placed in my vault in Winchester, Virginia. The actual memorial at the Handley grave was built by the New England Granite Works of Hartford, Connecticut. It eventually took 4 railway cars and weighed approximately 75 tons, and this was all involved in the transportation to Winchester from Hartford, Connecticut. The second and third items of the will made bequests to 2 Catholic institutions in Scranton. The fourth and fifth items in the will deal with the gift of $250,000 to the city of Winchester. Specifically, it stated, and I quote, "I give and bequeath to the city of Winchester, Frederick County, state of Virginia, the sum of $250,000 to be held in trust by said city for the purposes hereinafter named. Said bequest is to be retained by the city and invested in the bonds of the state of Virginia at interest until the said sum of money and interest added shall amount to $500,000. At which period of time I order and direct the said city of Winchester to erect, construct, finish, and open a public library for the free use of the people of the city of Winchester forever thereafter. Said library shall be known as and called the Handley Library. The 6th, 7th, and 8th items provided minor requests to individuals, while the 9th item in the will was one that would be the subject of subsequent litigation. Specifically, I partially quote from item 9 where it states, I also give and bequeath the following sums of money to each of the persons named in Schedule A, which schedule is hereby made part of this my will, the same as if the name of each person was named herein. The problem is that no names are ever added to Schedule A, and there were individuals who later claimed Judge Handley verbally indicated that they would be remembered in his will. Items 10 through 19 and 21 through 27, I would describe as administrative in nature, but buried within those provisions is language that would become important later in litigation, construing the terms of the will. Item 20 goes to the heart of Judge Handley's quiet, charitable nature and strong support for education, where it provides, I order and direct my executors to continue paying the expenses of each boy and girl that I may have at school or college at the time of my death, until each of said persons shall graduate, and when such scholar shall have finished and graduated his or her education, to pay each boy or girl the sum of $500 out of the income of my estate. The 28th item is the gift of the residue to the city of Winchester. And once again, I would quote, all the rest and residue of my estate I give, devise, and bequeath to the city of Winchester, Virginia, to be accumulated by said city for the period of 20 years. The income arising from said residue to be expended and laid out in the city by the creation of schoolhouses for the education of the poor. As will be discussed, this provision in the will, although a boon for the city of Winchester, provoked years of discussions and federal and judicial determinations regarding exactly what the language required be done in order to carry out the intentions of the testator. The 29th item named 4 executors to administer the estate and gave each of them the power and authority to name their successor. On July 31st, 1893, Judge Handley executed a codicil, or change in layman's terms, to his will, in which he revoked the appointment of B.E. Leonard as an executor, leaving the number at 3. In my opinion, that was a good thing to do, because having an even number of executors allows for tie votes, while an odd number will almost always produce a majority vote. However, the alleged reason behind the removal is that Judge Handley was dissatisfied with this individual, who was the head of the firm which contracted with the Equity Improvement Company of Winchester to build the Winchester Hotel. With the death of Judge Handley on Friday, February 15th, 1895, the 3 remaining executors wasted no time in qualifying on the estate Monday, February 18th, 1895. They let the weekend go by because the courts were closed. Upon learning of Judge Handley's bequest to the city of Winchester, the mayor and council sought legal advice regarding their accepting and administering the trust which the Handley bequest created. The city was advised it was not competent to administer the trust, so city council then passed a resolution which states in part, we hereby request that the General Assembly of Virginia to confirm and make self-perpetuating the following Board of Trustees to receive and administer said bequest. A committee from council then visited Richmond, and a bill creating and chartering the Handley Board of Trustees was passed on February 7th, 1896. The original charter contained the following provisions, and I think it's important to cover each one of these. Number 1, it declared it was lawful for Winchester to accept and provide for the administration of the Handley Bequest. It directed City Council should elect a Board of Trustees consisting of 9 citizens over the age of 21 years who are residents of Winchester to serve staggered terms. Stated a City Council member could not at the same time be a Handley Board of Trustee member. It allowed City Council to fill vacancies on the board. It defined the duties of the board as being to carry out the purpose of Judge Handley's will as it relates to the city of Winchester, but it provided further any plan for the ultimate application of the fund must have the approval of City Council. It provided board members would serve without pay and without any conflict of interest in serving on the board. It required annual reports to the City Council and the publication of the reports in the local newspaper. It required the appointment of a treasurer of the board who was not a member of the board and who would give bond payable to the city of Winchester. It provided when any plans for the ultimate disposition of the Handley funds have been given to City Council and approved by it and published in a local newspaper, the plan shall not be questioned unless a lawsuit was brought within 6 months after the date council approved the plan. It provided the books of the board should be open to City Council, and board members were required to file their acceptance of election with the clerk of City Council. 8 years later, almost to the day, the Virginia Assembly passed various amendments for additions to the original charter of the board, the most notable being the requirement in Judge Handley's will that the trustees should invest trust funds in the bonds of the state of Virginia. And that was overridden, and other prudent investments were allowed for. This is very important. Steve, you can appreciate this. I mean, at one point in time, the Virginia bonds, that was the gold standard. You invested in those, you got a good return on your money, and you went about your business. But as we all know, I don't give investment advice, but diversification, capital appreciation in your investments in terms of equities gives you the opportunity to get some upside appreciation in your investment. But the flip side is it can also go down. But it was a major milestone that they weren't restricted to invest only in bonds of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The first meeting of the Handley Board of Trustees was held on January 22nd, 1897, with Major Holmes Conrad being elected president, and with a resolution being passed to notify the executors of the Handley estate and City Council that the board had been duly organized. I'm sure Judge Handley was looking down on the proceedings with a smile on his face in view of the fact that Major Conrad was a very close friend with Handley, dating back those early visits to his adopted city. He often visited with Major Conrad at his home on Cameron Street, which, as a side note, was located across from the present-day City Hall, where the parking lot for the Joint Judicial Center is located. Excuse me. Excuse me. A further interesting tidbit is Henry Whiting, a former law partner of mine who went on to become a Virginia Supreme Court Justice, saved the front door to the Conrad house when it was being torn down and had it restored and installed as the entrance door to the Circuit Court Judges' Chambers on the 3rd floor in the Joint Judicial Center. So if you've ever been in the Joint Judicial Center, if you come in from the Cameron Street side by the statue of Explorer Byrd, if you look up to right up the staircase to the top of the 3rd floor, you'll see it's a Pepto-Bismol pink door, and that's the door from the old Conrad house that was saved by Judge Whiting. Both the executors of Judge Handley's will and the Handley Board of Trustees endured many trials and tribulations over the years, ranging from a lawsuit filed by Handley and by Henry Handley and 11 other alleged cousins of Judge Handley, looking to have the residuary clause in the will declared void. Remember, the residuary clause is what provided for the bulk of the assets to be received by the city of Winchester under the will. There were various arguments put forth by the representatives for the Handley cousins, but the one I want to mention here goes back to my earlier comment regarding the reference in the will to a Schedule A, which had no names included in the schedule. The argument was That omission made the residuary clause uncertain and therefore void. I have to agree it was poor draftsmanship to provide for bequests of money to persons named in a schedule and then have no names or amounts of money set forth in such a schedule. The wording begs the question as to what the testator intended with that provision in the will. The case was, happily, initially decided in favor of the will and the defendants, and upon appeal was affirmed. The net result being the residuary clause was held to be valid. We wouldn't be where we are today, if it hadn't been upheld as valid. On the other hand, the Handley Board of Trustees was forced to file a lawsuit for a judicial determination of their rights, duties, and powers. In a 1901 case tried before Judge T.W. Harrison, which to this day has not been appealed from, the judge declared in regard to the control, custody, and investment of the Handley Trust Fund and its application to the purposes of the trust, the February 7th, 1896 Virginia legislation, which had been requested by the mayor and city council of Winchester at the time, removed the city council from having any authority over the trust and substituted the Board of Trustees in its place. This was really a case where we have a new mayor and council, and they were looking to undo what the prior council and mayor had set in place originally. With various lawsuits behind them, the Handley executors and the Handley Board of Trustees started working on funding the bequest for the building of the Handley Library. Shortly after the turn of the century, the board began to purchase 3 lots at the intersection of Piccadilly and Braddock Streets for the princely sum of $9,200. Eventually, the cornerstone of the Handley Library was laid on May 28, 1908, and on August 21st, 1913, 5 years later, the completed library was open to the public. With the construction of the library completed, the Handley Board turned its attention to preparing for the time when their second responsibility would come. The end of the 20-year investment period, when the funds would be released to the board, was fast approaching. A committee was appointed to meet with the board's Pennsylvania council and the estate executors. A list of the rental properties owned by the estate in Pennsylvania was assembled, and at a meeting in June of 1914, the Handley Board of Trustees officially asked the executors to turn over in kind the real estate devised by Judge Handley's will to the city of Winchester. The executor's response was, per the terms of the will, they were required to sell the property and turn over the proceeds. Once again, the executors and trustees found themselves in court, where the board requested the executors account for the administration of the estate and turn over all of the assets in kind to the board. The judge determined under the terms of the will, the executors must sell the real estate. The Handley Board appealed the ruling. However, the decision was sustained by the Superior Court. Remember, these cases were now being tried in Pennsylvania. The real estate was eventually sold, and the Handley Board received the bulk of its assets from the Handley executors in the form of deeds of trust notes related to the real estate in Scranton in a final settlement between the executors and the Handley Board of Trustees executed on May 12, 1917. The investments of the residuary bequest totaled $1,640,963.59, yielding approximately $73,000 annual income from the bonds and mortgages. Although most would agree, item 28 in Judge Handley's will was broad and rather vague when it stated the income arising from the said residue to be expended and laid out in said city by the creation of schoolhouses for the education of the poor. However, Judge Harrison decided in the Albert Baker case, which we discussed earlier, that this direction in the will was ascertained, construed, and held to mean, and shall be so applied as though it did in express terms provide that the funds be expended and laid out in the purchase of the necessary land, the erection and equipment of the schoolhouses, and the maintenance and conduct of the schools so provided for. In June of 1917, the Handley Board contacted the General Education Board of New York to study the city's educational needs and recommend a plan to carry out the intentions of Judge Handley's will. A year and a half later, the General Education Board published a report with a range of possibilities discussed, from establishing a college, a technical school, a high school only, and a private school. The ultimate conclusion was that the wisest use the Handley trustees can make of the funds at their disposal is to cooperate with the people of Winchester in establishing a system of superior public schools. And that is a quote from the General Education Board report at page 57. The report went on to recommend a legal agreement among the Handley Board of Trustees, the Winchester School Board, and City Council be entered into, and that to implement all the plans, a superintendent needed to be employed. After presenting its plan for the ultimate application of the Handley Bequest as required by the charter, City Council held a meeting on January 14th, 1919, where the plan was approved by unanimous vote of the council. The terms of the plan are summarized on pages 101 and 102 in Garland Quarles' book, which I would leave to your individual study. On May 6, 1919, Mr. F.E. Clerk was hired as superintendent of the Winchester schools. On June 21, 1919, Mr. Walter McCornack was selected as the architect of the proposed Handley School. I'll stop here for a minute and point out that both the superintendent and the architect both came from Cleveland, Ohio. We hired the superintendent, and I wasn't part of the discussions, but I'm going to guess that perhaps he suggested you might want to contact this architect in Cleveland and see if he couldn't design your school for you. So I will just leave that out there as a tantalizing food for thought, because that will be part of the discussion on March 3rd that will be held at the Handley Auditorium. And I think the presenter, Carl Eckberg, is very interested in any feedback anybody has. He's trying to tie it all together, but it was a good superintendent and a great architect. It's just an interesting statement of facts as to where they both came from. The cornerstone of the Handley School was laid on June 13th, 1923, and the Handley School opened for classes in September of 1923. It's worth noting that the land where the Handley School was built sits on part of the 72-acre tract acquired by the Equity Improvement Company of Winchester in July of 1890. But when the company failed and was in default on its loan, Holmes Conrad, as president of the defunct Equity Improvement Company, was authorized to convey the property, which would become known as the Equity, to the Handley Board of Trustees, which Holmes Conrad was also the president of. The consideration for the purchase was that the Handley Board of Trustees would assume the outstanding debt on the property. It turned out it was really a good deal for both parties. The Equity Improvement Company was out from under the debt, and the Board of Trustees got 72 acres for the remaining outstanding debt on the property. Previously, the Handley Board of Trustees had also acquired a 5-acre tract of land on the east side of Kent Street, which in July of 1925, it conveyed to the Winchester School Board for the construction of what for many years has been known as the Douglas School, and which today serves as the Winchester Public Schools administrative offices, among other things. In 1929, the Handley Board purchased a 208-acre farm located partly in the city and partly in the county. And 2 years later, it conveyed part of that property to the Winchester School Board to be used as a site for the Virginia Avenue Elementary School. With the construction of the Handley and Douglas schools, the Handley Board of Trustees' responsibility for the construction of school buildings had been satisfied. Currently, the 9 members of the Handley Board of Trustees and the independent secretary-treasurer of the board meet quarterly to review and discuss the trust investments of the various funds set forth in the summary of the Handley Trust, which you can find on the Winchester Public Schools website. We award scholarships and provide funding that helps maintain superior educational programs for the children of the Winchester Public Schools, as well as to enhance the Winchester Public Schools' ability to attract and maintain the best staff possible for our schools. The board also looks to supplement, where appropriate, the Handley Library located in the city of Winchester through the use of funds provided recently by a donation to the Handley Board of Trustees. The board also works on various matters which come before it and require its attention. In conclusion, as we all know, Judge John Handley made an extraordinary bequest in his will when he left most of his estate to our city for the creation of schools, houses, for the education of the poor in Winchester. One can only speculate regarding the motivation for this grand gesture. However, everyone can agree any person who has been lucky enough to have attended Winchester Public Schools or has lived in Winchester has benefited from Judge Handley's generosity. Over the last 100 years, countless numbers of students have received a first-class education as a result of the best and the brightest teachers who have proudly served as Winchester Public School educators. Anywhere you travel in the Commonwealth, everyone knows John Handley High School in particular, and its Olmsted Brothers design grounds and Jeffersonian-inspired building. Judge Handley's legacy is not only to be found in the physical facilities his gift has made possible, but also the continuing inspiration his story has provided for a continuum of private benefactors to invest their time, energy, and money to benefit the Winchester Public Schools and our community as a whole. I would stop there now and ask for any questions. This is when the real learning takes place with the question and answer period. So fire away and we'll try and see if we can't get you an answer.
Dennis, did you say that at one point in the late 1800s that the council no longer was responsible for appointing the members of the trust? Or are they still responsible?
No, they're still appointed.
To this day,
Yeah.
the city council.
No, but what they did was they appointed they formed the request that the Handley Board of Trustees be formed. That's where they got that in the legislature. And they became the mouthpiece, and they said, it's yours, you're in charge. So the mayor and council, when they originally did it, that was set up, it was fine. But then at a later date, a new mayor and city council tried to, in effect, take back the power. That's when the Handley Board of Trustees had to go to court and say, who's in charge here? And that's when Judge Harrison said, it goes back to 1896, when the mayor and city council asked for the board to be appointed. And that's where it remains. So, no, they're still in charge of appointing members.
But how much influence do they still have on the inner workings of the trust?
They, as far as I'm concerned, and we're lucky to also have with us tonight John Froth, the former chair of the Handley Board of Trustees. But as far as I'm concerned, the inner workings of the Handley Board of Trustees, they don't have any influence over it at all. Their influence, if you want to look at it that way, comes in that they are the ones that appoint members to the board. John, would you agree with that summary?
That's true, but in the, I guess, middle 2000s, council became very upset about how much money we had or didn't have. And they tried to intervene in workings. And the main way they intervened was shortening the
Terms.
Right. For one time they were 9 years.
And one time they were 12 years.
12, and you were really going life if you wanted to. But there was two members of council that tried to get more involved, and that was their first move. And then they found out really powerless. Other than that.
So a good question. David, could you hear that okay? The discussion?
Yeah, I had a little bit of trouble hearing John, but I think I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
As far as the term lengths.
Right. So now the terms have been shortened, and I'm going to say that they are 6-year terms. Yes. And there's a term limit as to how many years you can serve. Now I think it is 12 years that you can serve. So 2 consecutive 6-year terms. But in years gone by, there are people that have served their 12 years and another 12 years and, long period of time. In fact, in Garland Quarles' book, there's a list that goes up until probably the 90s, I think, of all the former members of the Handley Board of Trustees and what their term was and whether they resigned or whether they retired, et cetera. And I actually have updated the list through the current. So it's a working board. It has a huge responsibility to oversee the investment of the funds that Judge Handley left to us, and through good investment of funds, it's grown, and we've supported the library. We support the Winchester Public Schools, and one of the things that we used to do a lot more of, and we're getting back to doing it, and that is providing teacher grants for enrichment, because that's what makes, I think, partly one of the things that makes Winchester unique is teachers can apply for a grant. And we had a group come back this year that went to Iceland, and they come back and they make a presentation to the school board as to what they did, and they go back rejuvenated and excited. I remember when I was on the school board listening to some of those presentations, and you could just see it and feel it, how excited they were, you know. So we are working to get that back into part of the budgetary process, because I think it's important, you know, that the teachers, well, I won't go down the whole road, but the teachers are paid, but they can be paid more. And so this is a little added something for that. Yes.
It's also a great recruiting tool.
Right. This is Kim Ball speaking, and exactly that's what I say. It's we're unique in that, you know, respect, and so I think it's great. And David, you had your hand up. So did you have a question?
Yeah. Well, I've got multiple questions.
Oh, great, great.
First of all, I'm in North Carolina, and you know, where we're ranked 46th in started teacher pay. So I hear you as far as the additional things you can do for teachers. But my question is more like a mathematical one. I believe you said the value of the residue was 1.643 million.
And yeah, 1.1 million. 690. I'll give you the exact number.
59 cents.
Yeah. I'm an accountant by training, a lawyer by profession, so I'm a numbers nerd, you know. But let's call it 1.6 million for a discussion.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I'm just wondering if anyone has calculated like a present value,
yes,
you know, an inflation adjusted present value.
Yes, the 1.6 million in 1895 is the equivalent of probably a gift of $39 million in today's dollars. That's your question, right? It was,
yeah,
it was a mammoth gift when you think of it in those terms. Very good question.
But less than some high schools cost today. I mean, at least in urban areas.
If you put it in those terms, but again, in 1895, that would have been like, you know, $39 million. So,
right. I mean, adult money.
Right. Exactly.
So,
exactly. Very
that was my main question.
Well, that's a very good, and you know, and it depends on what interest rate you use, et cetera.
Right.
But
right. The assumptions you make.
I took the easy way out. I, you know, Googled it or asked Siri. I forget what it was, and that was the number. So, you know, I've learned not to rely on it, but I think you get the point. It's many times what it was. And I think that Judge Handley would be proud of how the funds have been invested over the years, how they've been used. And we had a significant gift a couple of years ago, given that I made reference to, where it's specifically for the support of the Handley Library, which again, historically was the Handley Library at the corner of Piccadilly and Braddock Street in the city. You know, now we are a regional library system, but those funds are to be used exclusively for the city of Winchester Handley Library. And so that was a significant gift that was made a couple of years ago. So
I kind of live in the nonprofit world these days, so I'm fascinated by the creation of trusts and endowments. And we've seen in North Carolina a lot of like public hospitals that get bought by for-profit hospitals and then create, $1 or $2 billion endowment. Or when RJR was bought by KKR, some of the RJ Reynolds family had created foundations that were instructed to hold only RJ Reynolds stock, and they had to approach the court just like the Handley trustees had to approach the legislature to be allowed to tender the stock for the buyout and diversify the investments. And so when I try to explain Handley to people down here, I tell them that the people of Winchester live philanthropy every single day, and most of them don't even realize it.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that. I mean, I think, again, I'm not from Winchester. That's, I had nothing to do with that. That's a regret that I have. But I've lived here for almost 50 years now. And I mean, it's my home. Mount Hebron's where I'll be buried. And there's not a day that goes by that you can't see someone doing something charitable in nature. I'll never forget when we did the park to shovel the gravel for the playground at the city park when they built that first one. And we were Christensen family land. We were shoveling gravel all day. And on my way home, driving out past now the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley, there were people like the March of Dimes was doing a march, coming in, the 2 or 3 big things going on that day. And it is amazing. And it's great to hear you say that because it's just an amazing community. The stuff that's done under the radar, like you said, that takes place every day. And it's not necessarily a high visibility product or project, but it's done. And the people giving back, serving on boards, it's not necessarily giving money, but it's time and energy that they give. And so let me ask you, Dave, so what, you're obviously a Handley graduate, I'm going to guess. So what class?
79.
Okay.
I'm Ron Rice's son.
Well.
And I took off my hat I took off my hat to demonstrate that I inherited my hair genes from my mother.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Again, I did not go to school here, but I certainly know of Ron Rice. And yes, what a wonderful place.
Let me throw out something else. And I've shared this with Kim. I was trying to explain, first of all, I tell more people about Handley than I do about going to Duke. And part of that has to do with dealing with UNC people all the time. But
I was going to say, you get in trouble with that.
Yeah, it's treacherous. But I was actually searching Google for, a picture of Handley and stumbled across this, I think it's 51 pages, this monograph, I guess you'd call it, from the Rockefeller Foundation about their involvement early on with the Handley Trust. And first of all, I had no idea that the Rockefellers were involved, but it was just fascinating. And it was similar to what I've seen down here with the creation of big philanthropies. It was just fascinating to me how, everyone wanted a piece of the action. Everybody wanted in on it. And that this monograph, if that's the right word for it, made it seem like Gray Williams, who was the lawyer, I believe, administering the trust.
Gray Williams, exactly.
Yeah, that he was the hero who protected it. And it's a fascinating read if you're a history wonk. But anyway, I'm happy to share that or send it again to Kim if she wants to
actually that article by
I did bring it with me. I've read it. It's a great article. It's
last name is Rose, And he was a Handley graduate who went into academia and worked for, I think, the Rockefeller Foundation.
Right.
That article was published in 2003, I think, in the Winchester Frederick County Historical Society
Right.
Journal. I'm not sure that that was the first publication of it, but it was published in the journal, and we've been making that article known and sold to people through as part of the celebration. And I really, when I first read it, I really wanted to try to bring this man Rose, who is a Handley grad from the early 70s, back to Winchester, but then I learned he had died. He died, you know, at a fairly young age.
But you were right, David. It's amazing. I've read it as well. In fact, I brought it to the live presentation. I didn't bring it tonight, but it's a great monograph was a good term for it. But it's amazing all the intricacies. The people had different opinions as to how the money should be spent. We won't get into there's build a school for this. I mean, there's people who criticize even where Handley was built on that end of town rather than more centrally located. And well, we don't want to educate everybody, and so, but it was a fascinating read. You're exactly right. And as is Garland Quarles' book, when we had the live presentation last week, the question was raised why this isn't required reading for Winchester Public School students. It should be, exactly. Because but for Judge Handley, wouldn't have a whole lot of what we have today as concerns
Right.
the schools and everything. But good for you for that. Yes.
Well, and Kim, I'm sure you remember Martha and Emily Williams.
Sure.
Martha in your class and Emily in mine. And Emily, I don't know how or why I remembered this, but Gray Williams was their great uncle, and Emily's middle name is Gray.
Right.
That's
I don't know
interesting.
I don't know why I remember stuff like that.
Oh, that's great. So thank you for mentioning, Kim, I don't know whether you have any contact, but again, David, the presentation on the 3rd of March, that'll be at Handley, the historian, Carl Eckberg, is very interested in R. Gray Williams. And I went to the Handley Board room and went back through all of our records. I think as a historian and a researcher, he's like, what's up? You don't have any letters, from R. Gray Williams and everything? And I went through everything. There's nothing there. But he's very interested. So we might, he wrote me an email today, as a matter of fact. He's aghast at the fact that any correspondence with letters from R. Gray Williams, because I think he considers him, and as you mentioned, I have a tangential tie into him. He was partners with my deceased law partner, Sloan Kirkendall. So all the books in our library had J. Sloan Kirkendall and R. Gray Williams written in the inside flap, and they were eventually donated when they built the Joint Judicial Center. We gave all the law books to there, and I'm a book guy, but Nate Adams, another lawyer in town, informed me that those books have long since been moved to the basement. Everything's done, online. But R. Gray Williams was, I think, a quiet hero in all of this. Holmes Conrad went on to become Solicitor General and everything. So, but R. Gray Williams, you're exactly right. If you can track what he was involved with things, he really was, a hero in the whole process.
And the one who brought together clerk, the first superintendent, and the architect.
Right.
And
right. And it's interesting again. The Carl Eckberg came prepared to my presentation to pepper me with questions. And one of the things he pointed out was that R. Gray Williams, in effect, hired the architect sort of on the spot. And he said, and I said, well, he was probably acting based on the fact that he knew he could sell the deal to the board. But usually you would have, a board approval on something like that. But he And again, I digress, but I think everybody's okay with this. When he met McCornack, probably standing maybe where the Triangle Diner is now or something, and they were looking at where Handley would eventually be, McCornack was already said, I got a plan. He was already, formulating things in his head. So I'd love to be able to get more about that,
And in that vein, discussed with Scully today. Old Senator Byrd wanted to build a college, not public schools.
Right.
They got a college.
Exactly.
And then so many people thought that Handley campus was too more out of town.
That's what I said before, that it was out of town or it was in a nicer, it's gonna be a nicer area or something like that. Why not say that's all part of this monograph. A lot of this
Right.
goes into
That's right.
The different factions and how they wanted the money spent or not spent. Exactly. It's worth a read. If I can get you a copy of that. It's a great read.
And who originally
It was a
owned
feeding frenzy.
Handley currently sits.
The equity company.
Equity company, but they bought it from, and I know, oh man, it's a name that you'd recognize, the family name, but it's not the family members that you would know, I think, who they bought it from, the equity. This equity company, again, going back for a second, if everybody's okay with it, in Scranton, Pennsylvania, they had. Hey, Steve, you got some input?
No, I'm sorry. I've got.
Oh, okay, all right, anyway, John Handley started an equity improvement company in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and did, good things for the economy. So he felt when he came to Winchester, it was a small town, he could use a shot in the arm. He did the same thing, and originally they had authorization to issue up to $1 million worth of stock in this equity improvement company. But he overestimated people's willingness to put their money into the project. And he only raised about $200,000 in terms of funds for it. So I think he always considered that one of his great failures, and perhaps one of the reasons why he favored Winchester with his money, that he created this equity investment company and it flopped. So the equity investment company bought the 72 acres. That's why they call it the equity tract.
And what
And
was their intentions for that?
it was an investment.
In fact, well, they had housing factories.
And, and the equity also built when I made reference to one of the original executors who got canned because he was in charge of the construction company that built the Winchester Hotel, which is close to where the old hospital was, close to where the old hospital is. And it got built and it was only open for like 2 or 3 years and they tore it down, So he wanted to do for Winchester what he helped do in Scranton. And I think he considered it as a major blemish that he didn't get it done in Winchester,
Winchester's economy had what like Scranton.
Right.
We did so much construction and the money just went there.
Right. Right.
That's part of the thing.
But that David, it brings up the question of why did John Handley leave his money to Winchester? And that's that's usually one of the questions people ask. So I'll throw that out there as I think one of the things we just talked about is arguably one of the reasons. No one can point to it, but I think he felt like he started something and he didn't finish it. Kim, you have a comment on that?
I tend to agree that that's probably the primary
Right, yeah,
reason.
yeah.
I mean, there are, and I listed these out in the program of the little thing that we did this weekend for Judge Handley's birthday. But there's some speculation that he was upset with Scranton over a taxation issue, and that might have played into it. The timing, I'm not sure the timing really works in favor of that theory, because he actually wrote his will 5 or 6 years before he died.
He did, he wrote it in 1890.
So not sure how much that really played in. And of course, he was probably disappointed that the citizens hadn't reelected him.
Right.
But again, there was a vote.
Yeah, and I've been involved with a situation like that before, where there's almost jealousy with the successful member of the community. It's like, no, so one of the things Kim pointed out was where he had this hotel in Scranton, and there was all cobblestones in the street, and what they were doing was assessing a tax to put blacktop down, if you will, to pave the streets. And he didn't want to pony up the money. So what they did was they left the blacktop right where his hotel began. They left it there, left cobblestone, and then blacktop where it ended. And they had it become a haymarket where
Livestock.
where people would come with their livestock and everything in front of his hotel. So that was, I think, arguably stuck in his craw. I mean, he liked Winchester. He came down here and would visit with his friends, and he was welcomed here. He enjoyed coming down here. The fact that they didn't reelect him, sure, these are all just guesses, but I think the
who were these group of friends that originally brought him to Winchester?
Jifkins.
Jifkins, exactly.
I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware that he wasn't reelected, and that does. I've known some politicians with some grudges in my
right, and he was a great judge. But what happened was they had a second candidate within the party. They split the vote, so the other party won, and so
right.
He was out after one term, 10 years. But he was well respected, a good judge, but. The votes weren't there, but I'm sorry. So the Jifkin,
the Jifkins family, the father of that family immigrated from England the same year that Judge Handley, as a teenager, came from Ireland. And they both eventually ended up in Scranton, and they met there, and Handley became friends with Mr. Jifkin's sons.
right.
And one of the sons then moved to Frederick County. And Judge Handley came to Frederick County to visit Mr. Jifkins, and that was the first connection.
And that was when they lived spread out and all that outage.
Right.
Now, does this Jifkins family have a lineage here now, or did they?
I don't think so. They went back to, I think the one son went back to Scranton. And I don't know that there are any remaining, but Judge Handley met other people while he was here. And just started doing business, with lawyers, politicians. He met people who had served in the Confederacy, and he was enamored. And that's another reason that some idea that he was predisposed to Confederacy sentiments. He really looked up to Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. And
what years did he start coming to Winchester?
In the 1870s.
So after the war, though.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So maybe, like you said, John, he felt like he could make more of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
in Winchester.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I got said first, thank you all very much.
4 years later, what is the current balance of the trust after the gifts and the interest?
Well, let me just say this, David, the balance of the trust is in excess of $5 million.
Okay.
We'll just leave it at that. Yeah. So it's significant, but it's just the influence that he had on our community, and it's just too bad that more people don't know about it. That's my point, and if there's any way we could get this into reading in school, and early along, because it used to be a big thing. You'd march, everybody in the Winchester school system would march to Judge Handley's grave, not a representative from each class. It was everybody went, and
I have some embarrassing photos from first grade in that regard.
Exactly. My wife graduated. She was in the class of '68, and so she remembers all that. She went to school starting in elementary school at Handley. Back when they you know, the much younger kids were there at Handley. And so we have a lot to be thankful for because of Judge Handley. Other questions, I just think it's great that you've been on the Zoom tonight, David. I really say that, and I'm not pandering to you. It's been nice, you know, to have.
It's just something that I struggled to explain to friends down here, typically, you know, what that whole Handley pride thing is about.
Right. Well, it still exists as far as I'm concerned, you know. Again, I'm not from Winchester. I consider it my home, and I'm proud to say that I'm an honorary Handley graduate, and not many people can say that. So I've got degrees in my office like a pyramid, but the one that sits at the top is an honorary degree from Handley High School. So that'll tell you something.
Explain how you got.
That's great.
Well, I was on the school board, and you know, wound up with the year that I was chairman of the school board. We give out the diplomas at Handley graduation, again, on the steps at Handley, a tradition that I hope never goes away. And the superintendent of schools, Dennis McLoughlin at the time, knew he'd heard me lament. One of my true sadnesses in life is I didn't graduate from Handley because my wife, Mary Kellen Anderson, whose dad was the first ophthalmologist here in Winchester, second marriage for both of us, and we would have been the same class together, 1968. So, so he did it and presented it to me at graduation. So
That's a surprise.
yes, yeah, no, I knew nothing about it. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, yeah, that's. I graduated from St. Dominic's High School in Oyster Bay on Long Island, and I don't tell many people this. It's where I coached Ricky Pitino, who, you know, that people might have coached every place from the Celtics to Kentucky, Louisville, exactly. And has had a bad reputation in recent years. He's now coaching at St. John's in New York. But I grew up on Long Island and went to St. Dominic's. I was a basketball player, I digress, but a baseball player, had a sports injury and had to can my career that I was going to be back then a 6 foot, you know, guard in the NBA. But Patino was 2 years below me, and what they did was they made me the assistant JV coach. So I coached Patino when he was, you know, so anyway. Yeah, no, I don't tell many people that. But anyway, it's been great talking with you, Dave. So do you get back to Winchester at all?
I have a farm that is between, it's about 5 miles south of Double Tollgate.
Okay.
And I get up there maybe every 6 weeks or so.
Okay.
Not often enough. And I'm only partly joking when I refer to it as my 401 Cal plan. Because I mean, the plan is to move back up there in a few years.
So are you down 522 south on the way to Front Royal or 340 on the way to Berryville?
522 on the way to Front Royal.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And my stepfather is still living and has been just wonderful to me. And my mother had 2 wonderful marriages to 2 guys who were pretty much 180 degrees apart in temperament. And it was amazing. So
that's a cool story. I appreciate your sharing that. You know, this has been a great night.
Well, then Kim, should I share the story about the what I shared at the athletics oral history thing?
Yeah, about Hunter Maddox?
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yeah. Yes.
Okay. This does not happen chronologically, but after my dad died, well, no, let me back up. First Battle of Winchester swept right down that hillside where Handley was built in May of 1862. And then, so fast forward, I don't know, 100 and some years. And after my dad died, when he was coaching at Maryland, we moved back to Winchester, my mother and I, and we actually stayed with Hunter Maddox and Janet in their house for about 6 weeks while Hunter and John Capehart and Jimmy Umps and all these people painted the house that we were buying. I mean, you talk about support.
Yeah, no,
I try not to tear up, but Hunter in his role, his role as football coach, he kicked up a whole lot of things on the practice field at Handley. I mean, because they did so much grading when they built the school.
Mhm.
And I mean, and even like when I was growing up there in the late 60s, you know, metal detectors were becoming popular and people would just give us bullets, you know, 3 stripes for a Union bullet, 2 for a Confederate bullet. Well, in his basement, Hunter had this workshop where he collected or stored some of the things he had kicked up on the practice field at Handley, which by the time we came through, we referred to as the Astro Rock Garden. And I was 12 years old, and somehow I talked him into giving me a piece of shrapnel that was about that big, or is about that big, that had to have been from the First Battle of Winchester.
Oh, wow.
So, and he would not give me the bayonet that he kicked up because he wanted to save that for his grandsons. But and I must have been really annoying, badgering him about it. But fast forward, I don't know, another 20 years or so, and I sort of got into genealogy, and my folks gave me a regimental history book for what was my great-great-grandfather's Civil War unit. And I mean, I could even tell you what days he was AWOL. I mean, it was usually near harvest time. And, but then, you know, I'm in my early 30s and I discovered that my great-great-grandfather, Ron Rice's great-grandfather, was in that battle that came down that hillside at Handley. So 104 years before Ron Rice was coaching a slightly more civilized form of battle on the same ground, his great grandfather was there. And it's just, I mean, I'm no lost cause zealot or anything like that, but I just think it's a real historical curiosity.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And wow.
You should write a book.
Well, I'm so glad you did tell the story again, because I've been talking with the Historical Society, which has some publications funding, about maybe a book, a small pamphlet that they would publish that would be about artifacts related to Handley, and then the personal stories that come out of those artifacts. And this would be a perfect one. So
Yeah,
we're going to talk about this. Might not be
Happy to
until
contribute.
after June, till I finish with the events. But yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
happy to contribute or whatever they need. If I'd known this was going to come up, I would have brought the cannonball shrapnel as a show and tell.
Well, you've made this special, and I mean that truly, David. You sharing your stories and hearing. I mean, we all know when you start talking about JO and different people in painting, and that goes to my point of, we should stop recording because I don't want to get in trouble. But teachers are, you know, underpaid and undervalued, and Jimmy Umps and those guys would go out and paint in the summer. You know, everybody thinks, oh, you're a teacher, it's great. You work 9 months of the year, you got the summer off, you know, and they worked as painters, you know, Ricky Leonard and J.O. and all those guys. And so I'm glad to hear, that doesn't surprise me either, that they would have picked up paintbrushes and said, we're going to paint this and get it ready for it, you know. So
I heard a superintendent from the county just south of Chapel Hill say to a group of 400 or 500 people about a month ago that he had a principal who left his job to become a truck driver for Walmart.
right.
Just
Yeah, and the other thing is, we have had it in our own system, is where the best teachers have been driven out of teaching to get into administration because they can make more money as an administrator. And we've lost them. We won't go into it, but very good teachers. But unless both parents or spouses are teaching, it's hard to raise a family on a teacher's salary.
Right.
And everybody says, oh, you're in Winchester, wow, low cost of living. It's not that, when I moved here from Richmond in 1975, you could buy more house in Richmond than you could in Winchester, anyway, well, I thank you so much, truly.
Well, let me share one more story. And I
Sure.
hope you all will edit this recording. But
Well, why don't we go ahead and say good night for the recording,
Right.
and I'll turn that off. I'm not sure how much we have.
okay.
And then we do just have a few minutes of the library.
Yeah, because the library wants to, we don't want to overstay our welcome, but go right.
Let
Okay.
me stop.